Now, I am especially thrilled to introduce the next two speakers. Do we have Ella first or Bella first? Ella or Bella? Okay, Bella. Okay, they're a little out of order in the notebook. That's okay. Just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. The next two speakers are both survivors of being my interns. I had the great good fortune of having them. I don't know whether working for me was their great good fortune, except that it opened some doors too, hopefully. So we're thrilled to have them present some of their graduate thesis work here. Bella Moritz is an MA candidate in FIT's Fashion and Textile Studies, History, Theory, and Museum Practice program specializing in conservation. And that's my graduate alma mater, and also Madeline Shaw's, and who else in the room? Yeah, Catherine, and yeah, yay. She received her BA in art history with minors in French and anthropology from Roanoke College in 2022. She spent the last year working as exhibition designer on the FTS graduate student exhibition at MFAT, Untying the Bow, and spent the previous summer interning at the DAR Museum working on the Sewn in America exhibition. And if you like some of those beautiful little mounts of the little samplers and the little hanging inked bags, and I can't even remember what all else, the doll quilt, and a number of other things, that's thanks to Bella. Bella is an interdisciplinary artist with a particular love for fiber arts, and in her graduate thesis will be examining how the reconstruction of historical garments can serve both as a conservation technique and provide tactile understanding of their construction and use. So please welcome Bella.
Okay, that should be fine. Great, thank you, Alden and Sarah and the DAR Museum for the introduction and the opportunity to speak here today. As I mentioned, I'm a graduate student at the Fashion Institute, getting my master's in fashion and textile studies. About a year ago, when I was asked to select a topic for my master's thesis, I had just come off of a summer working here at the DAR Museum on Sewn in America. The objects that I encountered and the conversations, the many conversations that I had with Alden, sparked my interest in altered garments. After asking my professors about garments in the department's graduate study collection, I encountered this garment in the state pictured here. A previous student had extensively and beautifully conserved it, but a major problem still remained that kept the garment languishing in a box instead of being used as a learning tool. At some point during the garment's history, the waistband to this skirt went missing. Aside from this, a number of other curious aspects became apparent, and overall, the style of the garment did not seem to neatly fit into any late 19th century periods. As this object was donated to FIT in the chaos of the pandemic years and has not yet been formally accessioned into the graduate study collection, it has been separated from any provenance information that may have been provided from the donor. Yesterday, as Dr. Square mentioned using textiles as text, I will today present how, in the absence of any provenance information, one can read a garment as a primary source and see what stories this garment tells us about the lives that it has lived. The investigation of this object for this project took place over 4 phases: examination, documentation, reproduction, and comparison. First, I will explore what each phase of research taught me about the object, and then I will briefly explore the historical context through which this garment has traveled. So, to begin, what could be learned about the garment through examination alone? The examination began with the skirt. The first indicator that this skirt was not in its original state was, of course, the absence of a waistband. But there were stitch holes where a waistband once existed. However, I knew that this waist yoke was not original because the piecing was bizarre to preserve some of the originally embroidered flowers, and also a couple were appliqued. look at the seams from the interior showed inconsistencies in thread type and stitch lengths. The seams with the longer stitch lengths also had stitch holes along them, so I knew that they were altered. Further, pansies were embroidered over the neater, tighter hand-worked seams, yet the altered seams had flowers that were separated and rejoined. The skirt also had a mix of hand-worked and machine-stitched seams, and where the machine stitching ran down the center back, the embroidered pansies were sewn into the new seam. When looking at the hem of the skirt, it appeared that the hem was mostly original, but where the altered seam was present, the hem had been redone. And additionally, the silk fringe, which is worked continuously through the fabric instead of being appliqued, went over these altered seams without interruption. Close examination also revealed that stitch holes at continuous intervals may have belonged to a previous trim that had since been removed. The examination phase continued with the bodice. Here is a brief overview of the interior and exterior, so you know kind of what we're looking at. The style of the bodice made it possible to narrow down a date for the garment, but not an original date, since the bodice is made from pieces that clearly belonged to other parts of the garment before. The altered bodice is so exquisitely crafted, however, that it is highly likely that it was done by a professional. First, the fringe around the lower edge of the jacket portion was worked through the same purple silk fly as the skirt, but then it was cut off and applied to the bodice. The pansies that decorate the velvet were appliqued, but they were originally worked on the silk fly and then cut out. Additionally, the fly and the velvet used to make the jacket and sleeves have seams at awkward points, which you can kind of see at the diagonal and across in that photo, which suggests that these were another part of the garment before it was incorporated into the bodice. The lapels of the collar also had the fringe worked through them after they were constructed, but the placement of the pansies and how they've been incorporated into a seam suggests that this material came from another part of the garment. So the next phase of this project was documentation. Because one aspect of my project was the creation of a reproduction underskirt and a conservation-safe interlining, I produced patterns of the skirt to aid in that process. I found, like many other scholars working in the field of reconstruction and reproduction, that this process forced me to observe and to record the construction of the skirt in much greater detail. I was forced to reckon with every stitch and every stitch hole because I could be responsible for replicating each and every one of them. My patterns here record what each pattern piece is shaped like, but I also recorded in different colors and dot dash combinations whether the seams are original or altered, if they're worked by hand or if they're machine stitched, and where I hypothesized that material had been removed. I also recorded any ghost seam evidence of stitch holes. The next phase that I moved into was reproduction. The style of the bodice clued me in that the alteration likely occurred around 1902 to 1903. In order to produce a replica underskirt from around that time period, I consulted this pattern from Janet Arnold's Patterns of Fashion 2 and adapted the pattern to have a train that would fit the original length of my garment. So here's the pattern that I drafted for that skirt. It needed work, but this is what we went with. First, I tested both of the patterns that I produced using muslin to figure out if the pattern pieces were the right size and to learn what order they were assembled. I've brought these muslins here with me today, and if anyone is interested in seeing them, please find me during a break. Next, I produced a replica underskirt using a modern purple silk fly that I sourced. I machine pieced it, but finished the hem by hand so that the style of the hem, which would be visible under the original skirt, matched the original object's hem. I made a waistband out of washed muslin to attach to the original skirt to allow it to be mounted. And during that process, the skirt naturally fitted itself back into two deep pleats at the center back. With the stitch holes, this told me that not only had the garment been finished after its alteration, it had remained in its 1902 to 1903 altered state long enough for the fabric to retain some crease memory. Finally, I labeled all of the pieces I made so that a future student doesn't confuse my work with as part of the object's original history. And this is the final result of the reproduction process. The bodice is very fragile, so it should be mounted as infrequently as possible, but now these photographs can be shared more widely and allow more people to learn from this object. The final phase of this project was comparison. Given the information that I have uncovered from the object, what can be learned through comparing it to another related object? The label on the Petersham waist tape inside the bodice provided clues to assist with dating the garment. Unfortunately, not much is known or has been written about this couture house, and very few garments by them can be easily located. The address, 61 Rue de l'Arcade, Rue de Rome 11, should be the best means of dating when the company was active at this site. Any garment with this address and logo cannot be from before August of 1871, when the company relocated from their previous address after it burned down during the Paris Commune in March of that year. According to the label and address at the Met, Madame Fanet, not beer, was still working at this address around 1885, but the logo design had changed, was printed in green, and it was printed on a different material at that point. Because the address is capable of hosting multiple businesses at once, and the relevant parts of the Paris archives aren't accessible digitally, I've been unable to pin down a firm date for when Fanet and Beer no longer inhabited this address. But the label did prove useful for locating another roughly contemporary garment to the one that I was studying. This dress is housed at the Connecticut Museum of Culture and History. I decided to visit this garment in person to examine it in what I assume to be its unaltered state. And due to the coloring of the photo online, which is the upper left corner, I thought I was going to be visiting a magenta dress. Still helpful, but not the dress that I ended up visiting. It was in a much more similar colorway than what I was expecting, and this was a very exciting revelation. So here are the two dresses side by side. Because I had already made a pattern for the FIT skirt, I wanted to compare it to the closest sized layer of the Connecticut skirt, for which I made this approximated pattern. Based on the number of panels present and where I know the alterations to have occurred, it is possible that the FIT skirt had at least two entire panels removed, or at the very least trimmed down to form significantly to form the gores. It is also likely that it originally had pockets. Comparing the shape of the back panels, which were the easiest to get definitive shapes of due to the presence of the selvages, show that they were similarly constructed, so that the FIT skirt may have once been much more gathered towards the back of the skirt, like the Connecticut one. A detailed examination of the Connecticut dress showed a similarity in the stitch lengths to the original seams of the FIT dress, and in places with more fading, the thread had faded to the same color as thread that faded in the FIT dress. Additionally, both dresses used silk thigh with a very similar hand and the same selvage width of 25.5 inches. And when I looked inside the middle drapery of the Connecticut skirt, the unfaded color of the thigh was almost the exact same as the unfaded areas of the FIT skirt, which is very hard to capture on camera due to differences in lighting. Because the Connecticut dress retained all of its original passementerie, I was able to examine how the trims were applied. The stitch pattern of the Connecticut trimmings were very similar to the shapes of the stitch holes that I found in clusters on the FIT dress. The Connecticut dress and the FIT dress's hems were worked with the same whip stitch technique with approximately the same stitch and hem lengths. The Connecticut dress also had all of its original silk fringe, which was applied as single units to the hem at roughly the same intervals as the stitch holes in the FIT dress hem. So it's likely that in its original state, the FIT dress had fringe like this. Where the fringe was applied to the bodice, however, the Connecticut dress employed a separate braid that the fringe was worked through before being applied by hand, while the FIT dress had new fringe worked through a scrap of thigh and then cut out and applied by machine. After focusing most of my energy towards the skirt, near the end of my appointment, a closer look at the bodice revealed that it had been altered, not drastically changing the style, but making the bodice slightly larger. Seams were let out, and bizarre piecing helped to extend parts of the bodice, and some machine top stitching was added around some of the alterations. Comparison of the two waist tapes revealed the same logo and address, but a different material. The FIT bodice used a twill, and the Connecticut bodice used a ribbed watered silk. However, when the Connecticut bodice was let out, the waist tape was also extended by 1.5 inches, and the extension is made of the same twill tape as the FIT waist tape employed. This suggests that the Connecticut alterations were performed in-house by Fanning and Beer. This also suggests that first the Connecticut dress was made, then it was altered around the time that the FIT dress was first made. The FIT dress also had to have been made before the logo and Petersham material changed again in the 1880s, and that its original waist tape was reused in its turn of the century alteration. The final fascinating detail that came from this is that when the Connecticut dress was altered, the new waist measurement became 27.5 inches, the same as the waistband in the FIT dress. While many women could have had the same waist measurement at this time, I find it intriguing that two dresses by the same French couturier with the same measurements from the same time period and even employing the same materials ended up in the United States a mere state apart. Though I hope to one day learn the provenance of the FIT dress, I feel that it is not out of the question that these dresses could have once belonged to the same woman who then brought them over to the United States. To tie this work in with a greater context, I compared these garments to many fashion plates to see how they align or depart with major stylistic trends of those time periods in order to determine the most likely dates of construction. And here's another glimpse of the two dresses side by side to bear in mind as I very quickly go through these plates. As I sifted through plates from the 1870s, 1875 is the first that I began to see floral embroidery on the bodice and drapery panels crop up, along with the style of the draped overskirts and the fringe. Also in 1875, purple seems to be a very popular choice, especially with these multi-shaded drapery layers. The left image bears significant resemblance to the Connecticut dress, while the right image, with its similar shade, drapery length, and Van Dyke edges, is very similar to the FIT garment. Whereas I initially suspected that the FIT garment was a demi-mourning ensemble due to the color and embroidered pansies, which are a symbol of remembrance, it is also possible that it was simply a very popular color at the time, and being that the ability to achieve purple with synthetic dye only emerged 2 decades later, it's no surprise that it's pretty popular. If it was a demi-mourning ensemble, however, its alteration could have been a result of a change in ownership at some point, since there was a very large market for secondhand mourning clothing. The popularity of purple embroidered draped bustle dresses with fringe and Van Dykes persists into 1876, after which the style of dress shifts from bustle period 1 into the princess line. After reviewing comparanda and these fashion plates, it is my hypothesis that the FIT dress began its first life in 1875 or 6. Jumping to the FIT garment's second life, through comparison with extant garments, Janet Arnold, and many fashion plates from 1900 to 1908, I was able to pinpoint the style of the alteration to circa 1902 to 1904 due to the shape of the bodice, the many pleats, and the shape of the sleeve with the pouching at the wrist. Additionally, light purple seemed to still be a popular choice at this time, and with the streamlining of the silhouette, there likely would have been more than enough material from the 1870s garment to rework into a completely new bodice. It is also likely that there was a coordinating underskirt, and as styles continue to change and simplify over the next handful of years, my hypothesis is that the underskirt went on to live a third life as a subdued gored skirt, able to be paired with any number of interchangeable shirtwaist blouses that became the prevailing style. And this date is substantiated by articles printed in the Ladies' Home Journal between 1901 and 1905, instructing the thrifty every woman in how to rework her old clothes to suit changing styles. They describe taking old lace and tea dyeing it to make it look even more old, to make blousey vests, making bodices whose waists have rounded backs and tapered fronts, false jackets, sleeves with scant puffs, and a rage for velvet ribbon, accordion or tucked pleating, and Van Dyke trimmings. They provide details on making over old skirts, for which the drop hem becomes popular, and how to redo skirts with inlaid box pleats. All of these are stylistic details which appear in the FIT dresses alterations, and suggest that by the time these tips are making it to the home sewist, it's very likely that professional dressmakers and couture houses are also undertaking similar alterations. So here is our lovely FAT, Bannet and Beard dress, headed into its possible fourth life as a formally accessioned garment. Perhaps it will go on display, or perhaps it will serve as a teaching tool for future generations of fashion and textile scholars and conservators. Perhaps the research that I undertook will one day serve to prove or disprove any provenance narrative that can be uncovered. And I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into this garment's testimonial of its many lives, and will consider the stories waiting to be told through close object analysis in the future. Here's some of my primary sources as well as my secondary. Thank you so much.